The new phase of Avatar is concerning for me, and I really want to talk about this because it's something that I've been harping on for a minute. I know that some people would think that watching your most beloved franchise grow and expand should be exciting. Right?
No.
At least not for me. But let me explain. I personally think that some franchises should expand in different ways. Some expand forward, some expand backward, and some tell the same story from the same timeline but different perspectives. Or some of them just recycle the same stories and characters over and over, like there isn't a whole universe and other characters to explore, which is very frustrating for me. One example I can think of is Star Wars. We kind of get all of that, but it works. But besides the recycling part, I think that they expand the characters the right way as far as not continuously creating the same character. Like we have Batman, we have like so many different Batmans, so many different Supermans, and it's continuously recycling the same story over and over again. When there are so many other characters that we could look at, we're constantly seeing the same characters being recycled. But with Star Wars, they do a good job at kind of expanding the characters without retelling their story over and over again. But with Star Wars, we expand from the initial starting point, introducing new ideas and lore expansion, and even expand beyond doing the same thing. We can see a story being told from many different perspectives because the universe is expansive and we don't need to focus on one central story or the same characters. You can pretty much choose any era or timeline within Star Wars and you'll have good stories to tell in each and every one of them. For me personally, I would love to get some of the earlier Sith characters, different stories from that time, and really see that. That for me would be really cool to see. But at the same time, you can still grow Star Wars in a sense of showing stories and telling stories that haven't been told before, but kind of expand the franchise forward. So there's a lot of flexibility. But since there's a lot to explore and a lot of flexibility, it doesn't feel boring or repetitive. And to me, that is what makes it exciting. But with Avatar, we have a central theme, which is the Avatar, the master of all four elements. And the story is pretty much built around that concept. It's not to say that we can't expand it into any other stories within the same universe that doesn't surround the Avatar story. I actually think that would be pretty dope. I think that I would love to see that. But this is my issue. The first ever expansion that we received with Avatar is The Legend of Korra. And pretty much right off the bat, we have to play catch up. We have to adjust to major changes and a major time jump. Not only that, but we also have to mourn the fact that by this time, many of our beloved characters have already died. We didn't get answers to our most pressing questions, and that's the biggest letdown for me. There was too much left unresolved and unanswered. We end up seeing Aang and his gang end off as heroes, and then watching Legend of Korra to find that Aang was a bad father, quote unquote. You know, I guess that's debatable for some people, but they did kind of make him look bad in Legend of Korra.
You're right. I haven't been spending enough time with them. I wish I could be as good a father as Dad was to us.
Tenzin, your problem is you're exactly like Dad. He was so focused on saving the world and doing his duty, don't laugh, that he never had time for us.
He always had time for you, though. His precious little airbender.
Because you seem to have some grandiose delusion that we had a perfect, happy-go-lucky childhood. Guess what? We didn't.
That's too damn bad!
And Toph was a badass, but also a single mom who didn't have the best relationship with her daughters and even ran off to live in a cave in complete solitude. And my issue with that is that, first of all, Toph is one of my favorite characters. Growing up, she was the one that I related to the most. And to see that with everything that she is and how much growth she had as a character, she couldn't even have love. You know what I mean? Like, I think for me, it was just like, dang, she can be a badass, a cool person, lovable person, because she was always this tough girl, but we at moments would see this softness from her. But to now see them as adults and see that she was a single mom and she didn't have that love, it's not the fact that she's a single mom, it's the fact that she didn't have like a man, like, you know, like she didn't have that love. And not only that, but I just feel like she deserved more, and it was kind of hard to see that because it's kind of like, dang, so the girl who's not the girliest, the girl who's maybe unconventional to most people, does not get to have a loving relationship in the end, even though they kind of painted her out to be somebody that would be lovable, where at the end of the series, of the original series, you would think that maybe she would end up having that in the future because of the growth that she's had and how they portray her as somebody who is confident, who should be loved for who she is. And to see that she ends up being alone is something that really sucked to see. And I feel like that was kind of a weird and interesting idea and concept to go with for her story arc. So to kind of pivot and kind of go into a little bit of what I mean with context and just kind of reflecting on Legend of Korra and how they presented the original characters, I would say that what they did was kind of beautiful when you think about it. I think it shows the reality of what they are going through and the fact that even after they won and defeated the Fire Lord and the Fire Nation, like it wasn't over. They had to still continue to fight. They had to still continue to deal with so many different issues to build the world up, right? So I'm thinking about it, and it's just like, even with Toph, one of my thoughts is just like, well, she had good parents. She had, a great group of friends. She had an amazing character development, going from somebody that was very selfish to somebody who would do whatever she could for her friends and for the people around her. Was she perfect? Absolutely not. And even with Sokka, even with Aang, not being considered like a good father. I think about those things, and it's just like when you put everything into perspective, I look at it and I'm like, wait, we're talking about kids who literally sacrificed their whole life and dedicated their whole life, not only just the end goal of defeating the Fire Lord, but like to build the nation up. And, I thought about the Toph comic book and how she had to start from somewhere, from the ground up, teaching people metal bending, and how you think about that over a course of years and how, everybody had to sacrifice like pretty much their whole lives. So it's no wonder that, somebody like Toph would isolate herself at her old age, distance herself from the busyness of the city, distance herself from all the things going on. Why Katara would go from being somebody active in the community, active in, wanting to, make peace and all these different types of things, to then teaching people how, like, healing and going to that, right? Something that originally, when she was younger, she did not want to do. She wanted to be a warrior. Looking at it, it's like, it makes a lot of sense why they ended up the way that they did, because they literally dedicated their whole lives to building up governments, making peace, dealing with battles, dealing with arguments, dealing with conflict for years, since the moment that they all came together to defeat the Fire Lord. Pretty much ever since then, they've been fighting and creating peace and doing all these different things. And so it makes sense that, they would have to have sacrificed so much. Toph not really being able to be present enough for her daughters, or, Aang having to kind of make sure that Tenzin, knew all the different things about being an air nomad, and because he is the future. When he has kids, he's going to have airbenders, and it's all up to them to like kind of cherish and carry on the traditions. And so even though it may not have been intentional for him, imagine how hard it was to split his attention between trying to make sure that his son knew what he needed to know before like he, died, and wasn't able to teach him, and then also having to be the Avatar and do Avatar things. I gain a lot of sympathy for them, because it's just kind of like it could not have been easy. And even looking at that scene with Toph talking to her daughters, like you could see the amount of stress and her being a single mom, not knowing how that came to be, but just like, the amount of stress that she was under. And, of course, I'm sure she didn't like the idea of having to put so much pressure on Lin Beifong, her daughter, of course, to take care of the younger sister, and having that responsibility and having to try to manage that. I'm sure it wasn't an easy situation to be in. And so when I look back, I'm like, well, they literally built up everything from the ground up. And so it's just kind of like, of course, they would want to distance themselves from all of that. And they may not have the capacity because they've had to deal with it for so long. And so they sacrificed their whole lives to create peace for everybody, a city where everybody could be together, have, a government that supports everybody or keeps everybody safe and things like that. And that kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. For me, like I said, I would have still liked to see those parts, to see how like that came to be, which is why, we're getting the animated version of, the original characters and at the adult age. So maybe we'll get more context as to what was going on, what happened to Sokka, what happened to everybody, what happened to Toph's baby daddy, like, these different things that we have questions about, because I didn't really talk about Katara as much. But even when it comes down to Katara, it's just like, I was kind of frustrated when I saw her, because I was like, why is she doing the healing thing? Like, wouldn't she want to be like, making peace, making sure everybody good? Like, nah, Katara was like, I'm staying right here, I'm enjoying my peace, I'm gonna do this over here, teach this or whatever. It's just kind of like she kind of was, she slowed down a lot. And to look back at it, it's just like, of course she would. Like, all those years of fighting, of conflicts, constantly making peace has to be exhausting, especially when you've been doing it since you were a kid. And so it's just like, they had to take the back seat to let other people, take control, do what they had to do. You know what I mean? Kind of give up their power. Not power, but like, you know what I mean? Just learn to sit back and let other people do the job. But then we get Sokka and we get close to nothing but a sad story that he had no children, he wasn't married, and he died. And we didn't even get to find out how he died or when. And this is very sad for Sokka as well, because he had an amazing story himself. And I feel like a lot of people could relate to Sokka, you know, kind of being the underdog, but, you know, using his strengths, like he gained the respect that he deserved. Not that he didn't necessarily have the respect, but he earned his way, like within the team of Avatar, to be useful, and just by being himself and by believing in himself and not allowing himself to be limited because he wasn't, you know, a bender. And so to see that, even with all of his whole character arc, that he didn't really have like a family of his own, and he died, and we don't even know how or why he died. It's just kind of sad. And it's also like, dang, you and Suki didn't work out either. Like, what is up with that?
Sokka, it's you.
And so it just felt like a sad take on his story to just see that he was kind of just seeming like, oh, just gonna kill him off. And it's kind of like, dang, like he didn't have nobody else. Like he didn't have no like wife, no kids. And watch him in the original series and how he was with the kids in the Water Tribe. Like he's good with kids. So you would probably imagine that he would have a family at some point, or at least have like one kid or something. But to not have anyone at all was sad for me. And then we got Zuko, but we never got the answer as to what happened to his mom. And that part, honestly, was one of the things that really bugged me almost, I wouldn't say the most at all, but like it definitely was something that bothered me and something that I was holding out for. Hopefully like it would be mentioned or something at some point, but they never discussed it within the show. Maybe just because they wanted to put the comics out and just have people read and know about it that way. But even still, it was very disappointing for me. So while some of our favorite characters found happy endings, which is actually a good thing, you know, all thumbs up, even the Cabbage Man, you know, got a little something, he had a good happy ending. It seemed like the ones who deserved it the most didn't really get that. And I don't even say necessarily deserving it the most, but you would expect to have some type of a more positive ending, not ending to their story, but, you know, resolution or some sort. They didn't really get that. And although we saw and understood why Aang was the way that he was, and saw his children heal without him being there from that childhood where they felt like they were kind of just disregarded in a sense, or not as valued as Tenzin because they weren't airbenders, seeing that was nice. And also seeing Toph with her family again, that was also nice. She has a loving family, and that was also good to see.
Look, I know I wasn't a great mother, but one way or another, I ended up with 2 great kids. Good enough to risk my bony old butt for, anyway. If you can just find some way not to hate me, maybe that's enough. At least for me.
Me too.
I'm sorry, it just hit me just now.
But for me, it left me with more questions and more frustration. Because don't get me wrong, I get it. I never expected them to be perfect, and I think that that's great that they introduce such relatable themes to humanize them like they did with these characters in the original series. Like, they weren't perfect, and that's what made them so relatable, is the fact that we got to see them grow and evolve, go through things that we go through in different ways, yes, but it was relatable. But my take is that sometimes before you go forward, you need to go backward. I think that the constant push to have a new Avatar is annoying due to the gaps that already exist. Like, for me as a fan, I have more curiosity for the past than seeing any new Avatar, at least for right now. And I realized that with the Legend of Korra series, I really didn't give a fuck about a new Avatar. I wanted my questions to be answered. So imagine my disappointment when I hear that there's a new series dropping years after the original series ended, and having hope that finally we'll get answers, only for Legend of Korra to release. There are many disappointments outside of just not having those questions answered. Like, one of the other things being the time jump was a lot to process. We went from palaces and simple cities to large major cities, or I should say a large major city, like the concrete jungle that we know as New York City type of city. It's not the cities or the progress of society that bothers me, because in a world with bending, it makes sense, especially because we saw hints of where things were headed in the original series with the Mechanist and the introduction of metal bending thanks to Metal Mommy Toph. The issue for me was in the way that it looked. It looked too similar and basic to our world, in a sense that with the evolution of technology and bending expanding, as far as we see flying benders, airbenders now. We see lava bending earthbenders, and overall innovation. I would imagine that because of all of that, there would have been more unique themes in architecture. So if anything, to me, it just looked like they just had all this growth, all this innovation, and all these advantages just to have a world almost just like ours, but in the past. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just didn't fit for me. And so for me, it just was lame. I feel like it could have been so much better, and they could have been much more creative in the designs of the architecture and just how the city would operate or how it looked overall. And I feel like it didn't help that they Americanized it more. It made it less Asian culture inspired. I feel like what made it Avatar was having those Asian inspirations, but I feel like because they made it so Americanized, it kind of lost that feel for me. And so it kind of made me feel detached from what Avatar, what I know from Avatar. You know what I mean? I feel like it kind of strayed away from the cultural part of it. And I feel like it would have been beautiful if they were able to mesh in, the bending, the Asian theme, and these new advancements in technology and so much and so on and so forth, and making it like a creative, cool thing. Like, it didn't have to be like New York City or our version of like, what is that, like the 60s or something. They could have done something way better. So it just feels like a lost opportunity to do something that would have been really cool. But to get back on track, I did realize that if we didn't get anything on Aang, then I would have been perfectly fine with the series just focused around Avatar 1 instead of having to learn about him through Korra. I think that would have been a good way to kind of set a foundation to tell other stories, because then you get have established the spirit world and how everything started. And I feel like that would be a beautiful place to kind of take things further, whether that's revisiting the past and the future. I feel like it would have been a cool concept to start there if they were to do another series after the original series. Not only that, but people genuinely seem interested in learning more about past avatars. To me, that's more interesting than continuously pushing new avatars. Also, not only that, but playing around with perspectives instead of a story focused around the avatar, maybe a show or a movie or something like that, on a group of like anti-heroes, kind of like the freedom fighters, or just something like that, of people who are actually living in these societies but telling their stories in a way that's fun and exciting, but still expanding the universe and not straying too far from the Avatar concept, but kind of expanding on it to give it different perspectives. And I think it adds diversity and nuance as well. But it feels like they're forcing things forward without nurturing and solidifying the foundation, like the older content and the lore already established, and instead trying to drag the fans along into new territory when we haven't even fully established the old stuff. And a lot of us just weren't ready to move forward yet. And many of us still have curiosity about the past, different avatars, and different things to explore from the past that seem very interesting that we got glimpses of in the original series. Even in Legend of Korra, that would have made us want, to see these stories and hear these stories from these other avatars and other concepts that seem very interesting to explore. People have been saying for years they've wanted to see Kyoshi. Like, sure, we got the books, they're great, but imagine a Kyoshi series. That would be so cool. And you know what? I am happy that there's going to be a movie with adult Aang and the gang, but I have no interest in the new avatars that they're trying to introduce. And based on what I've heard, there's supposed to be like 2 avatars at once. My major concern is that while things expand and our knowledge of the spiritual part of things grows, that the waters don't get muddied or overcomplicated, because I feel like that's a turn off for a lot of people. It would be for me if they're to do too much with it to where it just gets confusing and just too much going on as far as like with the spirit world. Now we got 2 avatars at once. Why is that? A lot of questions. We don't want to have people asking a lot of questions to where the lore and these different ideas pretty much fall apart because there's too much going on and it's too complicated for people to follow. It's already hard enough to see their decision to erase all the past avatars, only leaving Korra, and then finding out Korra destroyed the world. It's already too much for me. In all honesty, that shit, it broke me. And when I say Korra destroyed the world, apparently she did later. So I just want to clarify that. That could be a theory, who knows. But I started to feel like I won't be watching any new avatars or any other avatar content unless it's dealing with Aang or any other avatars before him. I think it's just realizing that for me, I don't want the disappointment from the new stuff to taint my love for the original stuff. I just don't enjoy the direction that things are going in, and that's coming from a major fan. But that's coming from a personal preference. It's not coming from feeling any type of anger or frustration. It's more more so just like a preference of what I would rather see and what I would rather watch. And I get that that's not the case for everybody. I think there's a lot of people who are more open-minded and okay with these different ideas and exploring these different ideas. Even for me, I think that it's kind of cool. I just think that, you know, it's kind of like one of those situations where you watch a show or a movie growing up, and to you it's like you just have this certain vibe or idea of how that show felt, how that movie felt, how it was, right? And then you see that they remake it years later and you're much older, much more mature, and watching that new thing makes you feel differently about the original thing in a sense, right? There's sometimes where it's just so bad that it kind of just puts you off and it kind of just taints the purity that you felt with the original. And so for me, with certain things, it only happens with certain things, but for me, I feel like with Avatar, it's kind of like that, to where I don't want the pureness and the love that I have for the original stuff to be tainted by new stuff. If the lore continues to expand, but in a way that gets more complicated and gets, you know, just gets into murky waters. You know what I'm saying? There's a such thing as a little bit too much, and that's my concern for myself personally. So this isn't about me wanting things to stay the same or even the dragging out of certain storylines. I think that the live action series confirmed for me that I don't want the same stories to be told over again. I just want to see things band and grow. But I think with this particular franchise, going back and telling the stories that people actually want to hear would be a great way of expanding, but also getting a stronger foundation to then introduce new stories, like a future Avatars, and hearing their stories or having their stories be told. I just think it's a more palatable idea, just because so many of us, we have a certain thing that we want to see, right? There's so many things, loose ends that we haven't really, certain, itches that we haven't had scratched. I think it's a huge opportunity for the creators to go back and tell these stories and give the fans what we've been wanting, and then expanding from there, because we're ready to have new stories being told, but to continuously just push out new Avatars, new stuff, and it's kind of like, it just gets too much for me in a sense. But that's my personal opinion. I will always love Avatar. I'll always rock with Avatar. This is not coming from a place of hate or just animosity or just trying to be negative. This is actually coming from a place of love and just saying that, look, I'm worried. Other people are worried. But, I guess we'll see what happens. And I can't wait to see that movie that they'll be coming out with the adult original characters. So with that being said, let me know your thoughts down below. What's your opinion on it? Are you excited about new things coming out? Is there things from the past that you would rather be watching, or that you want to see, that you wish that they would create for us fans? Let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next video.